Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Index Office Hours. Today is 20th of August, and this is Index Office Hours 171. If anyone is new to Index Office Hours, this is the town square for graph ecosystem participants to come together and discuss the most important topics for indexers. This is a conversation and we love participation. So if you'd like to get involved in today's conversation, which will be a back and forth discussion, please do via the text box in the corner. Or if you are having any challenges unmuting your mic, let me know and I can get that sorted for you, as that's another way of getting involved in today's conversation. And with that, let's get into today's exciting agenda. So, as always, we give a shout out to the latest GRT IQ episode, and today is no different. We have Emily Lin for podcast episode 182. She is developer relations at 𝗨𝗀𝗲𝗂𝗧. 𝗨𝗲𝗂𝗧, as many of you know, is a layer 2 scaling solution. We recently had them on at IOH. And their role is to provide a more efficient and scalable platform for Ethereum with greater usability and adoption. Emily talks a bit about her background in the Web3 space. She used to work for Consensus, which is a company I used to work for as well. She was working on Linear, which is pretty cool, before moving over to 𝗨𝗀𝗲. She talks a bit about L2s and her work. She's doing DevRel at 𝗨𝗀𝗲. And of course, she talks about the graph and the usage. So do check out the episode. Thanks for posting the agenda, Juan, and also the link to the episode. We've got something here. There's a quote from the episode. As a roll-up, both on the linear side and on the 𝗨𝗀𝗲 side, I have to have graph because there are so many existing dApps that we would want on our chain to port over that require the graph there. So many new use cases and new dApps that will need a product like the graph in order to succeed. Okay, great, overwhelming vote of confidence for the graph and how it's widely used. That's pretty cool to see. So thank you for posting that quote there, Nick. Okay, wonderful. Now we hand over to our regularly scheduled Repo Watch section.
Thank you, Abel, and hello, everyone. Okay, so today is starting with the execution layer client. We have had a new 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗳𝗀 release. This is version 20.60.6. This release includes improvements in state diff encoding compatibility with Geth, some enhanced call tracer functionality, and a bug fix for missing blobs during backfilling. We have tested this release on our testnet. Then we have a new Nethermind release. This is version 1.28.0. I won't go through the release notes here because we covered it a week ago when it became a release candidate. And then we also have a new release for Arbitrum Nitro, which is version 3.11 beta 3, which introduces validation fixes, also configuration update for string values in JSON to arrays, some compatibility fixes for split validation, and a removal of the default Nitro validation RPC request size limit. There are a few other relevant release notes, but these are the main ones. Then we haven't had anything new on consensus layer clients or on graph stack, but this week is a Launchpad stack update. So the ways in which we've updated the Launchpad stack over the last 2 weeks have been we have improved all of our charts that use P2P, so peer-to-peer, to retry fetching an external IP if in the first try it fails. So those charts that have improved have been Subgraph Radio, 𝗨𝗀𝗲𝗂𝗧, 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, Lighthouse, Listener Radio, Nethermind, and Nimbus. And then we have also had new releases based on upstream dependencies for ProxyD, 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, Nimbus, and Lighthouse. Similarly, on Launchpad namespaces have had stable releases for namespaces Ethereum, Gnosis, Polygon, Arbitrum, 𝗨𝗀, monitoring, and graph. You do something special to get external IPs. So yes, we have an init container in Kubernetes for those resources that run P2P. And that init container does one of two things. So if your Kubernetes cluster exposes external IPs via the nodes, so when you do kubectl get nodes, you see the external IP of the node, then it's a very straightforward command, which runs to record that to then update the service, the P2P service. And if that's not available, then we have a different command that we run. So we've just improved that mechanism, and I'm just gonna straight away send you an example. Yeah, just incoming now. But yeah, this is it from me. Over to you, Juan.
Just a quick one. There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, one sec. There is the P2P self-discovery as well. But you still need the external IP of it's to do with the services. But yes, let's take this offline for more detail. Okay, over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, getting into Protocol Watch, this is going to be a brief one. We don't have any new updates for governance or research on the forums. We do have a few updates on the contracts repository. There are a bunch of PRs mainly for Horizon, particularly for the latest round of audits from 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗂. There are a bunch of fixes to all of the issues that they've encountered, as well as some small chore updates to the subgraph endpoints and some linting updates, but nothing, no new features, just mostly fixes. We don't have any new releases for any of the network subgraphs either, so that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. I don't know if Pac is around. I'm going to hand it over to 𝗨𝗀𝗂 now.
That was very quick indeed. Okay, cool. Well, now we move on into the open discussion section of today's conversation. And I figured it would be a good idea to have a continuation from last week's conversation. So we were fortunate enough to have Derek, and he went through many aspects of his team's Postgres setup. So I realized in that conversation we kind of overflowed, and there was a lot of discussion, and a few folks wanted to take away some of the knowledge and then test a few things out, and then come back in today's conversation and share some updates. I don't know. I remember Payne, you mentioned that you wanted to do that. So yeah, I wanted to open up the space, see if there's any follow-ups. We've got Derek here, so yeah, we can kind of start the conversation up again and make the space for that, and also open space for Derek to add any additional context as well. So yeah, I mean, have any of you implemented some of the things that were discussed last week? And does anyone have any thoughts that they want to share or questions that they have for Derek?
We tested some stuff, Derek and I, late last week. Can you guys hear me okay?
Amazing. Yes, loud and clear. Yeah, that's amazing. Would you like to share a bit about that?
There's not much to share at the moment, but it was just really to test that something that Derek had written around the account-like piece, which is sort of like the low-hanging fruit in terms of potential performance gains for very little effort. So we ran some queries to identify tables that match the sort of profile that Derek has had good experiences with in terms of adding the account-like whatever, I don't know what the right terminology is. Static is putting tables as account-like if they meet a certain set of criterion. So we ran that against my database on my legacy one on Friday, monolithic database. And I can't remember how many tables it was, but it was a lot. Hundreds of tables that it was suggesting would be worth turning that on. So we turned that on Friday, and we're just monitoring the data now. The early signs are it's definitely improved things. It's not like some kind of radical improvement, because I already had that turned on for a lot of the subgraphs I run that, are form the basis for most of my traffic. It was already running for those. But there's definitely early signs are some definite improvements in latency, processing time, whatever you want to call it, around returning queries on those tables. But we need to leave it for a while now and gather data and just see if it has a long-term effect over the next week or so.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's kind of taking a backwards approach. Like a lot of the times you see queries and you're like, this query is slow, how do I improve it? And you figure out how to improve it. With this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at, okay, what's in my database that looks like it's bloated and could potentially use some optimization, but without regard to how much of your server's consumption is it actually using. So as Jim said, we found 182 tables that were like, okay, these are probable candidates for applying the count-like flag, just because it's got greater than 3 million records and it has a really high version to entity count. So let's go and these are just kind of magic numbers or arbitrarily inserted numbers. And that may not be kind of the sweet spot. And so we want to kind of test it out and figure out like, okay, at what point does the bloat actually matter? Is it closer to 5 million? Is it 10 million? Is it 1 million? And then once we've got that dialed in, I'm definitely happy to share that query out so that people can go around and just do a big old, great, apply this to all of these table type of thing. But yeah, so far we are seeing a general performance enhancement. But again, we don't know, like, out of those 182 tables, maybe only 30 of them are actually being utilized in queries. And like maybe that subgraph is being queried, but that table specifically in the subgraph is not being queried, right? And so, but there's no like storage increases or anything like that to apply this flag. It's just literally a byte that gets changed in one table. And so it's a very, very easy thing to change if it's helpful.
Amazing. Really do appreciate you guys sharing that, and it's great to see that there's some follow-up from last week's conversation. Payne, you also mentioned that you wanted to play around with some stuff based on last week. Do you have any thoughts, things you would like to share?
No, unfortunately, I didn't have time to tackle this.
All groovy. Anyone else had any time to?
I mean, the thing that I put on account like basically made my whole database function again, so that worked. But I still need to find others. I wonder if we should build a script that parses all the results from Grafman stats show and the SGD number, and like picks out all the results that are like entity to versions 0. You know what I mean? So you can basically
That's essentially what this query is doing. Is it's using that same Graph-N stats show, but just opening it up to all subgraphs on the database, and then limiting it to those that have greater than 3 million records and a ratio of less than 0.1%.
Which query are you talking about?
I can paste it in here. Is essentially, this is what it currently is. I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, go hog wild, because we're still kind of testing it out. But that's the same query as the Graphman shows stats one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's dope. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Anyone else have any thoughts or things that they'd like to share, questions they have based on last week's conversation?
I wanted to put a request out there and see if there's anyone or any entities that would be interested in turning Derek's session last week into a document. So like a run sheet of how you would go through the process of identifying and improving query performance based on the workflow that he showed us last week. So I'm not looking for people to respond now, but if there's someone out there who wants to do that, then, for me, that's the way I like to digest these things. And I would find it greatly valuable, and I'd be very grateful to have something like that I can look at, rather than having to sit on YouTube and sort of pause and start and try and find the bits where Derek did various things in the session.
Nice. Yeah, that could be really useful. Where do you think makes sense for that document to live?
In a gist or in a repo somewhere. Thanks, Paulie. I did actually see that. I just haven't had a chance to read it yet. If anything's going to be the right going to have that, it's going to be this document. Yeah, this already looks like what I need.
And if there's any of the specific queries or anything that's needed for any of the sections, just let me know, and I'm happy to provide those.
You know what I'll do is I'll run through it, and then what I'll probably come up with, Derek, is these are the queries you use. Can we have these queries or a sanitized version that you'd be happy to put out there? So I'll try and do that before next week, and have a go at going through it myself.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good to me.
That sounds good as well, Matthew. Anything that Derek sends me, I'll send it to. Do you want me to send it to you, Matthew, Paulie? All right, Paulie, it might DM you at some point then after next week. And again, those I can't emphasize enough. Those if you find IOH valuable and you actually really want to be able to read through what was said on the calls, these Pinax blogs are absolutely awesome. They're incredibly detailed, and like a huge extension to the GraphOps notes. Very valuable. I find them valuable. If you're just listening to this on YouTube, I recommend looking at this as well. They're really great. So thank you very much, Pinax, for doing that.
Yeah, just want to echo that shout out. It's absolutely incredible. Just looking through the index of 170 index office hours 170 document, and it's pretty well documented. So yeah, that's great. Appreciate Pinax and the whole crew over there.
I have a different topic again. It's just like I'm being greedy here, Abel. But if you want to talk about something else, but totally relevant, I do have a topic. Like I need to pick Payne's brains on something.
Sure. Yeah. We'd love to hear that. Let's go.
So I've said it a few times now in the last few IOH I've been on. I'm sort of I've built a new stack that can scale horizontally, and now I'm trying to move from my legacy stack, I'm calling it, to my new stack. So I've given up on the idea of migrating subgraphs for now. It's quite complex and risky. I've decided I'm going to sync them all. So what I want to do is take out all of the subgraphs that I'm currently allocated to, and I want to stick them in a script that will then go away and hunt for all of the graphs I need for those subgraphs. And then I want to write just a super simple script that adds all of those subgraphs. So the ones I'm allocated to, plus all of the graphs that are required to my new deployment, and just let it go crazy, syncing them all over the next couple of weeks or whatever. And Payne's written a pretty complex set of scripts that can do something along those lines, but I don't fully understand exactly how they work. I'm just wondering if I have the link here that I can link them. Are they? Should I link them, Payne, or are they super out of date? Because I've got a slightly updated version, I think.
Which ones are you talking about?
The subgraph. So it's the one that goes away gets all of the subgraphs on the network. It just filters by signal, I think, and whether or not it's got rewards.
It should still
enabled.
work. Should still work. I'm gonna do a pass on all my scripts, and I'm gonna repost everything. I actually have a repository, but it's private. I'm gonna make a public one with all the scripts that I have, like things that I'm printing. Drafts in CSVs, drafts in a format of like a table, stuff like that. A bunch of other useful queries and whatnot. But yeah, feel free to post whatever I posted. They should still work. Otherwise, I can revise them.
I've got a link here to the question I asked. So I'll link to that, which links back to the actual scripts. Let me find it. That's great to hear, Ford. I'm so desperate for that functionality right now. Ford's just saying there that graph dependency handling is it's in the works right now. It's been worked on. So I linked to the questions I had about the scripts, Payne, if you could remember them. Now I can go find it myself again. Yeah, so there's like this off-chain first scan.py that goes and pulls all of the subgraphs off the network. And then it goes and gets all of the base QM hashes. I can
repost them after this call.
Yeah, I think the problem
I have
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I don't fully understand the scripts, right? They're quite complex, and you heard what I said there about what it is I'm trying to achieve. I'm not sure if the scripts will quite achieve what I need and if I need to edit them. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, so the script basically does the following. So the first scan one, it's using the so it's basically pulling all the list of the list of all the subgraphs on the network, and stores them somewhere in the memory, and then through this list, it then queries I don't think it queries the network subgraph, but some subgraph to get the manifests of those subgraphs, and within those manifest files, you get the first base of a graph, basically the first level of a graph. Only because I don't want to overload IPFS too much, and then with this first. So the network subgraph then. With the first list of the graphs, it then queries again, but this time on the IPFS because it cannot find them in the network subgraph anymore. So it queries IPFS for each individual of those subgraphs to figure out if there's more chains of graphs, basically.
Right, so it's actually sort of like the genesis or the proto subgraph for lots and lots of subgraphs. Is that right? Because what I noticed was that script returns, there's obviously thousands and thousands of subgraphs on the network, but that script returns a very small number. So they're basically the genesis of many, many different subgraphs. Is that correct?
No, but like it depends on how much you ask the script to query. Because if you just want to look for the top, like it's ordered by signal, and like if you say just give me anything of like 1,000 signal or like 100 signal, is gonna give you like 1,000 results. But if you limit it to like say top 100 subgraphs, whatever that is by signal, it will just give you the top 100 and whatever graphs there are within those 100. But I have another one that gives you a table. If that's like a visual, right. a better visualization of the data, basically.
What I really want is to feed in my list of So let's not even call it my allocation. Let's just say I have a set of 100 desired subgraphs that I want to sync. And I want all of the subgraph graphs for those
Yeah,
100
you can feed it
subgraphs?
manually. I have a separate script that basically you can feed it a manual list of subgraphs that you can go through.
Right. Okay. That's
I can
probably
share
what
it.
I need then. Yeah, that would be really useful for me. All I've done right now is I've taken all of the offline subgraphs that I have on my legacy and I've just deployed them all onto my new deployment, because that's about 90% of what I need. I'd rather have something more accurate though, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll post it. I need to figure out if it's still working, the one that I still have around. But yeah, for sure, it's easy.
Okay, cool. I had another question. Maybe this is one for you, Payne, maybe not. I don't know, but you know, we have like test networks coming and going. Testnet networks like Sepolia will eventually disappear, and then there'll be something new. How are you managing like adding and removing chains from your configuration, or do you even remove them, or do you just iterate, put it, like put another chain on top of your config and leave the old ones, or do you delete old chains out of your database? It feels like that's something that I should be doing with Graphman.
Well, to be quite honest with you, I don't index any testnet or like run any RPCs for testnets or whatnot. So it's hard for me to give you a clear answer. But if I were to index those chains, as long as they're subgraphs with like published to the network that have signal and that are generating money, I see no reason why you remove them, and the RPC and the data. You can easily just remove chains, like Vincent says. It requires just deleting all the subgraphs too, though.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize there was that. So Graphman actually allows you to delete, I guess, the chain from the database.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
cool.
Graphman chains truncate, if I recall correctly, but you need to make sure that you don't have any subgraphs pointing to that network ID.
Will it let you do that, or will it basically tell you, computer says no, you have subgraphs on this chain?
It will refuse. It will refuse to let you remove it if you have any chains on that, or any subgraphs syncing on that chain.
All right, thanks, Slim. Yeah, I'm only asking because I'm just, I've been using Sepolia and Arbitrum Sepolia, and I thought, well, I've got them now, I've got the node, so why not at least have them in my production indexer in case for some reason they're useful. But I know that at some point I'm going to have to remove them, and it will be annoying to have. One thing I notice is that if you leave, this is a problem for me on my old legacy deployment, if you leave, like a whole bunch of chains, waste chains in your config, then it takes forever for the graph nodes to get going because they all time out waiting to try and connect to all these different chains that no longer exist.
I think it's actually remove, not truncate. Yeah, truncate clears up the whole block cache, but it just keeps the chain. It keeps the chain, but it's completely empty. It doesn't like. If you don't want to remove all the subgraphs, basically, you can use truncate. But if you want to completely get rid of everything, you have to nuke all the subgraphs and then use remove.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So truncate is more about like freeing up space from that cache. That's where most of the space is taken up, right? It's the block cache.
It's the only space taken by a chain, basically, yeah, the block cache. And maybe also the call cache, but I don't think that's much.
Hey, one thing before it gets too buried in the chat. Ford, in regards to the way that we are currently processing graphs, because we're essentially syncing, we'll just say deployment, n-1, and then as of the graph block, then it's going to start copying all of that state into a separate schema. Is it viable to, rather than copying it to a second location and persisting it in both places, Is it viable to actually like morph it and like rename, hey, this is now deployment QM, version N or whatever, rather than having both exist? Because like with some subgraphs, we've seen some that are deployed with like 10 different graph bases, and we had to do kind of a fancy query to try to identify these guys and ultimately remove them from our database. Because once we're synced on the version N, we're like, all right, we don't care about N-1 or anything before that.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about with the graph node engineers. I think there's like a few tricky things. It seems simpler on the surface than it is, but it's definitely doable. There's like a few cases where you might want to have the data more clean and around, like if a base dependency is used for multiple subgraphs, but that doesn't really happen that often, I don't think. So I think it's like working through a few determinism issues and making sure we can stop a subgraph in a clean state and then start it again with the new code. But yeah, that would be nice. I mean, the copy operation is pretty expensive and it takes a while.
Yeah, we've noticed, especially once we have multiple copies going, it seems to add a lot of strain on our server. I don't know if it's that there's conflicts or things with having multiple, or if it's just that each of them are bulky and that's what causes strain. But we have noticed that once we start having too many of those running at the same time, it gets a little bit cumbersome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'll also be interesting as we're working now on, I mean, it's still experimental, but a subgraph composition feature. So a subgraph could just rely on another subgraph as a data source instead of as a pure graph. So that could help us get better reuse of data where you have one subgraph that many others depend on in more of a clean way and not having to copy data around everywhere. But definitely agree that it'd be nice to just do that in place. It's like a pretty big operation and causes duplication of data as well.
It's a bit of a holy grail, that, right? Subgraph composition.
It's been talked about and thought about for years now. So hopefully we'll have it fairly soon. I'm pretty excited.
So that means that somehow the subgraph will be able to, is it actually referencing other subgraphs, so you'd be pulling queries for other subgraphs, or is it on a lower level than that? So, I guess what I'm actually ultimately asking is, am I going to have to use less disk space as an indexer?
Well, so basically it's an index time composition. So you could think of other forms of composition where maybe you have multiple subgraphs that you can compose across at query time, and they live in their separate schemas and tables, and then at query time you join them. That would be a little different. This is in your subgraph manifest right now, you define data sources, and they're typically a contract address and some events that you're listening to. This would offer a new type of data source where instead of it being an external contract, it's basically a subgraph you already have in your database. And so like when the dependent subgraph is syncing, it's basically just sending queries to the database instead of doing Firehose or RPC calls or streams.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
And so I think like immediately that doesn't mean you're going to get huge storage improvements. But if we get this well used on the network and we get to a place where, say we have a handful of core subgraphs with a lot of data in them that's pretty simple and raw, like maybe just decoded data that many other subgraphs then rely on. You could see a place where many users are relying on the same base subgraphs. And then as an indexer, you would have much less repeated data because you'd have one subgraph that many rely on for that core data instead of the core data being repeated across a bunch of subgraphs.
Yeah, that's pretty significant economies of scale right there for everyone.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Is the thought with the subgraph data sources, will they have their own triggers, like their own handlers, or is it just something that can be referenced while another event handler is firing?
They would have their own handlers, but then the data that's feeding into those handlers, instead of it coming from an external source. Basically, it would be coming from the database. So the input to your mapping handler would basically be like the entities in your database.
So like when entity changes occur or something, that could then trigger something kind of downstream on the data source.
Exactly. And we explored it being like pretty low level, like every single entity change triggers the mapping. And I think that's actually going to be a hard concept for developers. So right now, the approach is basically like block by block. So it's kind of like a block handler, but it only will be if there's actual entity changes. So every time there's a block with entity changes, it would gather all changes for that block. That way, as a developer, you don't have to reason through the potential like long list of like small deltas within a block in order to get at the output of the end of the block. That's kind of getting a little bit in the weeds. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like it seems like a really simple one is like if you're to make a subgraph that just literally indexes only the events of a contract, and then you use that as kind of like your base. You know, if we take the graph network subgraph and we index all of the allocation close and delegation events and all that type of stuff, then rather than having to re-go through and sync that chain again, as long as we have that base subgraph with all the events, and then you have another subgraph on top of it that applies your transformations. And if at any point we need to change those transformations, we don't have to change anything at the base level. That's kind of like that to me is what excites me about subgraph composition just a ton, because it will improve the developer experience in getting things synced quickly. But I was just trying to get a sense of like, okay, well, how do those how do we go from step 1 to step 2?
Yeah, so I agree. Like one of the huge values is like fault separation, basically. So you can put like your fairly expensive operations, doing a lot of decoding of data, a few things like that into your base subgraph, and you're probably going to be pretty confident that those are correct. And then on top of that, you can do things that you might want to iterate on more often, and you might have more likelihood to have issues with, which might be like aggregations or business logic on top of it that you might want to change. And then when you change those things, you don't have to resync all the data. You just redo just the aggregations themselves, and then you could also like bifurcate out your subgraphs into smaller ones that all depend on one data source instead of having to have one monolithic subgraph. So yeah, little teaser there.
We'll have a good alpha share.
I wish I could be humble too, but my infra's down. Because I have literally almost the same number.
I don't actually. It's Proxmox lies about how much space you have. So
oh really?
I might have a quarter of that, maybe a third of that.
Oh, because you over... Yeah, I get it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Makes sense. It's over provisioning with thin provisioning?
No, right? It's because I specify pools at four or five different block sizes. So it counts each of those, even though it's the same storage pools underneath, it counts each one. So it's like 4 times a 45 terabyte pool or whatever, So
oh, got it.
It's lying. It just makes me look cool. I'm sure that's an absolute that's a speck in the world of Pinax, though. I want to see that on Pinax.
Yeah, I was about to say Pinax laughs somewhere in the corner.
Yeah, I want to see the Z and ZFS coming about, zettabyte storage or whatever it is on the Pinax cluster.
Pinax is coming with a size that starts with X.
Yeah, that's
actually funny. That's a good one, Vince.
3.7 𝗨𝗨𝗪𝗀𝗧 used. That's crazy.
Jesus. But I suppose most of that is that hard drives, right? Like the gist of it.
Just reading at 1 gigabyte per second all the time.
We'll have a good bit of flexing. Okay, there's a question that's come to for Ford. Do you want to shout that question, Ford?
Sure. Going back to a topic we're on, like the previous topic on chain management. We're work in progress. We have a command to rewind all subgraphs related to a specific chain. We find this could be super useful if there is an event that happened where maybe you realized your provider, RPC or Firehose or whatever it is, missed some data or something for a specific chain and you want to rewind all your subgraphs on that chain. So we have that work in progress. I was wondering if a command to remove all subgraph deployments related to a specific chain would be really useful to you guys, or how you guys feel about that. It sounds like maybe that would just be used once very rarely. But if you guys think that would be commonly used, we can add that to the task list as well. Yeah. Okay. Sounds like it'd be super nice to have, even if it's rarely used.
Another one that I came across, Ford, was, and I don't know if this is, again, if it's just too rarely, it's so rare that it's not something worth spending the time on, but I've built like a sort of mini replica of how the, 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗧 and yourself, you talked about, hosted and the way that the databases were architected and the splitting out the primary and the block cache and the subgraph databases. I did the same thing, and then I wanted to take an existing chain and sort of migrate it over. But one of the challenges I came across was I just don't understand the block cache well enough to know how to move my block cache, from an old database to a new one, or from one shard to another shard. So the ability to move the block cache, or even just specify a specific chain that's on a specific block cache database and be able to move it to another shard with a different database name would be really useful in that scenario. I don't know if it's something that's common enough to be worth spending the time on.
I know there's a command to point
Yeah, go ahead, Payne.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
I'm just looking, like, I'm not intimately familiar with GraphMan right now. I don't use it a lot, but I'm looking at the code, and there's a change shard command under the chain module. So you could change the block cache shard for a chain. I don't know what else would be required there, but it sounds like you could set up a shard and then point the block cache to that one. Already supported.
That's interesting, because the problem I was having that, I change it and then it would tell me, oh, I'm sorry, but it already exists on this database, so we're not going to do anything, and it just froze up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe there's some issues with it where maybe there's an edge case or something. So
I'll have to play around with it some more once I have a proper test environment set up.
Cool. Yeah, let me know how that goes.
Amazing. Another thing that is worth mentioning is you posted in the chat pane in IOH chat about the silo finance arbitrum subgraph. Or I think it was how?
That was fixed in the meantime by data nexus, but the thing still days, we need a subgraph police to make sure that people don't deploy shitty subgraphs to the network, because we all have to suffer for this.
Yeah, I wonder. I know you're saying it in jest, but I wonder if there's ways that we can educate subgraph deployers such that these things don't happen. Subgraph police is quite funny. It's a funny meme.
Yes.
So
Derek,
I
yeah,
I was the one that, I mean, I built this subgraph, so I'm the subgraph deployer in this case, and I'm making everyone feel the pain. And part of it's interesting because part of the when you're going through the actual subgraph development stage is you have to think in terms of, okay, how is this thing going to scale? And as we were building it, they wanted very specific data points, and I was like, all right, well, look, either I'm going to be going through a calculus course in order to apply your crazy interest rate logic in the subgraph mappings, or I'm going to make an RPC call. And right now, that's going to be fine, but this thing is not going to scale well. And so they were like, oh yeah, that's fine. And they didn't really care about scalability. And we had a whole discussion on what that would look like. And so we're at the point where, like, okay, it's reached its limitations on how well this thing can scale. And that was back when they had, 6 markets. Now they've got 40 markets across, 3 or 4 different chains and all that type of stuff. And so it's gotten to the point where it's like, yeah, our servers aren't keeping up with this. We need to dial this thing down a bunch. We do have another deployment that we're currently syncing. We are getting, sorry, I'm just pulling this up. Right now we're at like 500 blocks a minute on Arbitrum, which Arbitrum produces 150 blocks a minute. So it's not progressing like super rapidly, but it reduces the overall RPC load by quite a bit. And I'll post a picture of what is it, the overall time spent on different sections.
Was that still in testing, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, it'll still need to go through the data testing once we get to the actual chain head. I'm trying not to just toss a bunch of deployments like, okay, we just push this up to the studio and then say, oh, just kidding. We see a data issue and we're going to restart it. Because I did that a bunch in the past and felt bad afterwards. And so we're going to test the data and then we'll say, okay, great, this is what the deployment looks like. Go ahead and start syncing it. It took us, a week or something like that. But ultimately, there's the item for the host export Ethereum call that's only taking up 2%, which is a lot better because that used to be pinged at like 99.9%. Yeah, declarative ETH calls would be so much better, except we don't have the ability to input hard-coded values, right? Like if we could state like, hey, we want to make an RPC call and we already know that this is going to be the oracle that we want to use, or this is going to be the address that we want to use, or being able to reference certain entities, at that point, but we haven't loaded those entities, it gets a little bit tricky. And unfortunately, a lot of their RPCs don't have the necessary inputs coming from the event params. But yeah, there's a ton of subgraphs that could be super improved if we started using more declarative ETH calls.
Interesting. Yeah, I see your point.
On a more general note, on the same topic, though, I mean, the idea of having like this very flexible way of expressing your needs for data, like this is not, and having lots of foot guns everywhere and inefficiencies and all that sort of jazz is not like uncommon. Just trying to think if there are any, are there any analogies here, any other sort of technical spaces where we could look to see how, the DevRel community has helped to raise awareness around writing better code in general, right, for a specific thing. I don't know, I'm being a bit vague here, but I know that Mac and Derek are both out there. Many other people, I've seen a few people from various different initiatives within the ecosystem sort of tweeting out stuff about, here's how you can reduce your query load without actually, it's going to cost you less and you're going to still get the same queries back, like little bits of tidbits here and there about how to do best practices. But I'm just interested to know if anyone's got any thoughts on other spaces that do that really well, where there's some kind of complex product, but they're very good in the educational space or the awareness space in helping people learn how to use those things more efficiently. And I guess it's not just about like making it easier for the indexer, it's about making it cheaper and faster for the end user, really, ultimately.
I mean, I can definitely speak to my, personal experience of just talking to people that, like, usually I end up talking to people once they're already in like problem mode. Like, hey, this thing, isn't syncing or it's taking a while or whatever. And that's usually the point that they come to me. And then it's like, oh yeah, look at these articles that we wrote over the last 2 years since you last looked at your subgraph. And then they're like, oh, okay. And they start implementing. But in terms of having like proactive development, and honestly, that's one of the areas where, it's really nice to have, an active subgraph team, like, like the Builders DAO, where we're constantly staying on top of, best practices. But a lot of teams have like one guy on their team. And it's like, okay, go build this thing. They build that, and now they're tasked with a bunch of other stuff, and they don't come back to like maintain or keep their subgraph healthy. So, I mean, that's just kind of what I've seen. But I am really curious if there are examples of how other, complex products keep their user base afloat. Like I was just thinking, like, with the Ethereum blockchain and, the different execution layer and consensus layer clients and how they're keeping, different node providers up to date and stuff like that. I feel like that might be a similar but kind of different, just because theirs is so single purpose and it's just different methodologies on one purpose, whereas we have many different things that people would want to do with their data, and it varies quite dramatically.
I mean, it's at the moment, like if you try and compare it to maybe the more enterprise model, it's consulting, right? You get some super high paid engineer in who, like a 10x engineer, and they get deployed into enterprise environments to fix the problems that exist, like that's my experience of these things usually. I guess the only corollary in our space, and it's not really, it's kind of loose, right? It's Solidity developers and the like, right? Like that's in some ways there's equivalency there with developing an assembly and things like that. Like there's very strict parameters, and you could really do terrible things if you don't know what you're doing. Not quite the same, but again, Solidity engineers, good ones are, hard to come by. We don't really want that though, do we? We want it to be we want to try and remove the foot guns as much as possible, but without reducing the flexibility of the product. I think Builder DAO, like you say, Derek, is absolutely critical as like a new way of doing something like that.
Yeah, I wonder what incentives you could put in place to incentivize Builder DAO, and also, I guess, other types of orgs to do this kind of work. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the incentive. Like the Builders DAO can work on, paying our guys to work on this type of stuff. I think the main thing is getting in front of the people, as they're getting ready to develop, and making sure that it's kind of a known, like, hey, we'll do quality checks, we'll do, some of these things. We'll sync in on some of our indexers and just see, like, okay, what is this like to process? Because you pretty quickly get into things where you start to sync it and you're like, oh, this has got 30 graph bases. This is annoying. Maybe that was okay on the hosted service back when, they never got emails from Edge and Node saying, hey, this is pretty annoying. But on the decentralized network, we don't have those other 30 versions, synced. And so the decentralized network is like, hey, just remove that line entirely because we're going to have to sync it anyways. I love the secret phrase today.
Gert.
Yeah, that's all thanks to Pilly. She's the creative mind behind them. She's really good at it. Alrighty, any final thoughts, comments on today's conversation before we wrap? Alrighty, well, in that case, grab the POAP. The code is there. And just as a heads up, next week will be the Postgres session that we have scheduled. So make sure that you guys are there. We have the DBA, the new DBA who joined recently with Edge and Node, who's going to walk us through various things. And we're also going to have Lutter as well joining. So it's going to be a great session. Yeah, just make sure you come and heavy hitters, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be a great one. So make sure you come with all your questions. Yeah, hope you guys are excited as we are to put this on for you. And yeah, we'll see you all at there may be a chance that we switch to 5 p.m. UTC next week to make it easier for folks to attend. But we'll obviously do all the marketing if that's the case. So you guys should be well aware. But there's a chance that may not happen, but we'll keep you posted in any case. Yeah, we're very much looking forward to next week's session. Hope you guys are too. And yeah, see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.